If you were allowed to ask God one question when you got to heaven, what would that be? A few years ago, mine would have been, what in the world were you thinking when you came up with that idea of family? And knowing I wouldn't be satisfied asking God just one question, I'd talk really fast and get in a second. And that would be, did you really have to put us in that human suit? Well, fortunately, it's been a couple of years since those have been burning part of my reality. I guess with age comes wisdom, or with awakening comes insight. When I discovered that I was a spiritual being, learned about reincarnation, I realized that I played many roles on this planet. So my perspective on family shifted a little bit. If souls journey in clusters, then I realized that the souls of my immediate family must have played various roles in my life, and we must have lived past lives together. So, for example, I could have been my mother's brother, or my sister's daughter, my niece's grandchild, or my sister-in-law's wife. And if we carry those cellular memories and unresolved karmic patterns into this lifetime, is it any wonder that family dramas are so intense, or relationships can feel so screwed up? I had a lot of turmoil in my family growing up, so much so that I was actually envious of the first test tube baby that was born in 1979. And I thought, oh, it would just be so much easier to grow up in a laboratory. But obviously I didn't know the science behind it. But seriously, so by the time I was 30, I thought family was one of God's cruel jokes. Imagine my surprise when 10 years ago I found out that I actually chose my parents. And my soul got exactly what I needed. Sorry, anybody who here is new to this spiritual stuff? That was kind of a spoiler alert with my choosing my parents, because you actually chose your own family. And your children chose you. So with that new look at family, I realized that I should soften my stance on this being a curse and thinking maybe it could be a blessing. So my left brain kicked in, and I started to think, if I was a mother and a son and a grandchild to them, and they were to me, then we must know each other at some deeper level, and there must be some equality at the level of our soul. So, given that, if this whole soul family connection, maybe it really means that we're to take a deeper look at our oneness. So with that new insight, I realized that perhaps challenging God on my first question of family is not such a good idea. But certainly the second question is good, that issue about the human suit. I mean, really, how can God expect anybody to ascend spiritually when we're constantly struggling to get beyond our human limitations? So I had another aha moment, and I actually listened to the words that I said, that I'm striving to live a spiritual life while trying to overcome my human limitations. When the matter of fact is, I came here for the purpose of being human. So there's really nothing to overcome. So me, this physical body, this human suit, this vessel with all its limitations, is actually a conduit of my being on this planet. When I first heard these words, my human vessel is a conduit of experience, it was like this immediate knowing happened. And all these years of emotional chaos and distress and aching to find the answer of why am I here was right in front of me. I'm here to experience, to have emotional and physical experiences. My human suit is the vessel to get me on that journey. So, can I ever really embrace myself as a spiritual being if I don't fully love and embrace myself as a human being? And I realized that there was another part of that question. The phrase that we all hear about that, we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. We say it a lot. I say it a lot. But to what extent do I really believe it? To what extent is it true? Growing up Catholic, we were taught that Jesus is fully human and fully divine. divine. But as a kid, we don't really understand what that means. Even as an adult, to wrap my head around that is a really big deal. What does that really mean, and how does that relate to my life and my journey today? Perhaps those are the two questions that I should be asking when I get to heaven. So playing this little fun questioning game can reveal a lot about who you are. Imagine if we did this with our kids and what we could actually learn from them just by the questions that they ask. So I'm here to talk to you about conscious children, these multidimensional children who come in with these amazing innate abilities and skills. Some already know their mission and purpose in life. They arrive here with that veil of forgetfulness thin or not at all. They know their connection to Source. They come in, they volunteer to come in their human suit and experience the human collective during perhaps the most transformational time in our history. And I'm also here to talk to you about perspective and maybe challenge yours a little bit. We know that perspective is that framework through which we look at everything. That perspective will determine our perceptions, which is how we relate to everything. So simply put, the angle from which you look will determine how you interact. Different perspectives gives us a bigger picture and shows us the various aspects of an experience or of an elephant. Truth is colored by our perspective, and that's based on our individual filters as well as the construct of the dimension that you're in. So these children want so much for us to be able to proclaim and celebrate the magnificence of who we are, because in doing so, we proclaim and celebrate them. If we can raise our vibration to a point to fully meet them in their realm of dimension. The title of this talk, Conscious Children Bringing a New Perspective. I chose those words very deliberately. There's a little play on words there. First, children come to this earth bringing in a unique perspective of who they are as higher dimensional beings. They have a very different view of the third dimensional planet and its limitations than we do. They already know their connection to Source. They already have immediate access to multidimensional resources that has taken us years to obtain. So they bring with them a new perspective for us on how we can perceive our own human potential. The second meaning to this is in our attempts today to bring about a new perspective about who these kids are and how we perceive them. And it's that perspective that's going to determine our decision-making and our behaviors in relationship to them in parenting or in education, in healthcare. So they rely on us as light workers, as way showers, to recognize them and hold space for them in a way that's going to nurture and strengthen their spirit while they go along this journey of the third dimensional maze, and to hold space for them long enough for them to step into their own magnificence, into their own divinity as being fully human and fully divine. I have to admit that I must have the most fun mission on this planet. And I get to meet, teach, and guide kids who I've already known and taught for many lifetimes. I get to assist them in recognizing themselves and their gifts in this lifetime so they can go on to achieve their mission of saving humanity. I mean, how much fun is that? My other role is to assist them in acting as a bridge for them between their galactic energies and the energies they carry in their human suit, and helping them come into an alignment of their own unique, distinctive vibration. And an additional role that I'm playing right now as MC on their behalf. I am like the master of ceremonies, warming up the world stage about to introduce them and their gifts to an awaiting audience. And that's actually the role that each of you play in your own way as light workers. You're setting up the world who's not quite ready to accept these kids and what they have to offer. But we're getting there. So as MC, I'm going to be telling you some of their stories interspersed in this talk. And my hope is that you hear this from a space of heart knowingness. And not only can you get a felt sense of who they are, but it'll also spark a deeper sense of who you are. First story, first child I'm going to introduce is Cheyenne. Now this is her real name. I asked her permission to use her real name because I'm expecting that somewhere in the next couple of years we may be seeing her work. She's 14. She was part of my Conscious Youth program for over 2 years now. She's been hearing and getting messages from Spirit ever since she's been young. And her gifts have been accelerating as she's opened herself up to daily journaling, daily meditation. A year ago, she started trans-channeling the goddess Isis. And in her own humble and unassuming way, recently let me know that Mother Mary, Kuan Yin, and the Hindu goddess Kali is also coming through her. So rather than just telling you how amazing she is, I thought I'd give you an experience of this. So I had Cheyenne. I asked her if she would channel a message specific for this group today. She was thrilled to do that, not only to be asked, but also to share these divine messages. So this is a message from Isis. And it says, these new children are a whole new collective by themselves, the earth, God's children. These children have a direct connection to Source that is not marked by this world. They are perfectly pure beings. Therefore, they do not understand such concepts as war or killing, because in the higher vibrations, these things do not exist. A little child is completely transparent and does not think before he or she speaks. We must go back to a childlike purity, a close connection to Source. Nurture these children and let them be who they are. 14-year-old Cheyenne. One of the highest compliments I ever received came 25 years ago from my then preschool-age nephew. This was after one of those 6-minute recitals that we've all been to at one point or another. He took me by the hand, he led me to where his teacher was standing, and with all the love and pride in his heart and smile on his face, he loudly announced, "This is my weird aunt." My sister-in-law wanted to crawl under a rock with embarrassment, but I was thrilled. It was like, yes, little guy, I am and forever will be your weird aunt. It took that simple little word to convey to me that he saw our relationship one filled with fun and playfulness. To him, apparently, I wasn't like other adults. I was the weird one. Little did he know that his spirit and love and that of my niece a couple years older really called forth that weirdness. It helped me rediscover a joy and a playfulness that I hadn't remembered since my sister died when I was 4 years old. Surprisingly, it didn't take much to step into my playful aunt role. And I say surprisingly because in every other aspect of my life, I was really self-conscious. Like there's no way in the world that I would sing in front of anybody. I grew up listening to my dad sing and thought for sure that like tone deaf ran in the family. And if I ever sang, I'd never know that because I was tone deaf. Think about it. So I never had that problem with the kids though. So I'd be in the car and I'd be leading the sing-alongs, and my only concern was, do I know all the lyrics to Wheels on the Bus and Baby Beluga and the other Raffi songs? So we made some real indelible aunt memories. Like we'd have sleepovers at my house and we'd play slow motion ninja fighters and have kung fu fighting blasting from the stereo and jump around on the air mattress and fall over. My niece, we'd go out to eat. We'd always sit on the opposite side of the tables from each other, and we would transform into these sophisticated ladies with English accents with our little pinky up. Picture a 4-year-old. I mean, it was incredible. with our little pinkies up, drinking our iced tea, waiting for the pizza to be delivered. So to this day at holidays, all I have to do is go like this, and she just smiles. Giving and receiving unconditional love like that is something that I hope everybody gets a chance to experience at one point or another. My niece and nephew are now 30 and 26 years old. I'm anxiously awaiting for them to have their first kid because I'm going to make an awesome great aunt. I'm going to make an awesome weird great aunt, and I've already warned them about that. So my nephew's introduction was a little bit of a hint of foreshadowing of who I was going to become with these kids today. I have a private practice where I work with kids and parents and sometimes educators. And I'm also the volunteer director of the Conscious Youth Program for Flower of Life. I mentor our bi-weekly online youth program. I oversee and teach at our hands-on in-person event called Weekend in Wizardry. And our organization is always looking for ways to meet the needs of these kids. So we're starting a new mentorship program in January where these kids can work one-on-one with experts and really develop their skills. And we haven't forgot about parents. Every 2 months we have a parent forum, and they can get together and find support and talk about the challenges and the blessings of raising these highly vibrational kids. Back to the foreshadowing. It's not uncommon for the word weird to come up at some of our discussions with these kids. While we offer metaphysical topics and have opportunities for them to develop their gifts, I always find it important that we spend time talking about what it's like to be them. Things also like the power of our thoughts and self-talk. So these kids have challenges in their connections with other dimensions. A lot of times these kids don't even know or use the word dimension or ascension or vibration. They don't even know what we call them as gifted. They don't see themselves as gifted. They're just kids trying to be kids, teenagers trying to fit in. What we adults see as supernatural is just part of who they are. So one of the challenges that I have found is while I may be in awe of channeling divine beings or being telepathic or seeing time, space, energy warps, how they experience that for themselves may not be so awesome. They may hear these voices in their head and find it really distracting, or see these distortions of their vision as making for unsafe driving. So as my perspective has changed, I've had to ask the question of how do I honor these kids and tell them how amazing and powerful they are, while at the same time not sending the message that they're so different that it accentuates their already felt sense of alienation. Back to the word weird, once again. One of their shared experiences is really having friends and relatives see them as odd for their abilities. Sometimes they even get told that to their face. One teenage girl shared with us, with tears in her eyes, that her best friend accused her of being the devil and no longer talks to her. And this was after she finally got the courage to say that she saw and spoke with spirits. Or parents share the pain that they have of looking at their child who's internalized some of these messages and already see themselves as being weird. So when this comes up in our discussions, and it does, and it will, they know by now that I'm the first one to let them know that weird is good. Weird is simply that you're not what other people expect you to be. That's what it comes down to. So as we talk about this, that usually brings a smile to their face when they can identify with the ultimate truth, which is we all deserve to be celebrated. if there aren't people in their life to do that, then our group is a place they can come and find that acceptance and celebration. So it's kind of come and is becoming my trademark, that weird is good. I'm going to actually consider it having it engraved on my tombstone. And if nothing else, I'm going to put it on a bumper sticker. Whoa, okay. We have some symbols because we're going places. This is the perfect place to tell you the story about how I took these kids on a journey through time. One of our sessions, we went and did some time traveling. And we went back in time for them to visit their younger self, and we went forward in time to visit their future self. Their responses were amazing. Everything from getting great insights to healing across timelines. It was beyond, I sat there trying not to what? And be the adult in the room. So what we did was we entered our own crystal sphere, which was located within this long tube of time travel. And the control panel, it was like sitting in your own lounge chair, and they put their hands on the control panel, and they were powered by their telepathic abilities and the energies of their heart. So what I asked them to do is, as they travel down the tube, pay attention to the little pull of their heartstring or the voice within, and that would tell them where they're supposed to stop. And when the door opened up, just allow it to happen. So one boy went into the future to 2050, and he learned about the planets. And he was told that North America would have the climate of Australia. It no longer snows in Canada, and we'd have several other virus outbreaks, but none like 2020. A 13-year-old girl went forward in time, met herself at 30 years old, and what she saw was herself standing at the stove cooking. However, she met her future child, and the child is who interacted with her. So, dude, gives me goosebumps still. The child came and took her by the hand, went over to her mom herself, and said, "See, I told you this is true." Very cool. Not as cool as what happened to the 16-year-old. She went back in time, met her younger self during a time of a lot of turmoil and distress, feeling really alone and just not in a good space. 16-year-old comes back, meets herself at 8 years old, was very consoling and reassuring and told her how much she loved her, and it was really a beautiful thing. And then she added that she remembers being 8 years old in this time of turmoil and having a visitation from her future self who reassured her and made the next 2 weeks really noticeably different. So at 8 years old, you're having a visit from your 16-year-old who is sitting in front of me now in 2020. Yeah, isn't that wild? Fascinating. These kids are amazing. So I began this work with them in 2018. It came as a result of asking questions like, why am I here? Why am I really here? And what are the gifts that I have that I can bring to service to the planet? Now, these are not small questions to ask when you're 58 years old, when all of your friends are asking, how many more years do I have to retire? So I entered that process as a result of entering Ethan Fox's Lightworker program. And we took an in-depth look at the patterns of my life, the passions that drove my interest, and the activities that really ignited my energy, and coupled that with a channeling specific about my soul's purpose and mission. And we integrated all that to, not surprisingly, find out that I work with kids. I'm also a teacher in real life. whatever that life is and whatever time travel that is. So finding that out, working with kids, and it's not like anybody here, once you find that path and really step firmly onto the path you're supposed to be on, things continue to be revealed. So with each conscious child that I met, it's like activations were coming online. And it kept reinforcing the fact that this journey truly is one of co-creation. An example of this is about spring of last year, I started reviewing some personal journals. And what I just considered was a journaling technique, dialoguing with my higher self, with ascended masters, I realized was actually automatic writing. I was like a kid at Christmas time to realize I was channeling through automatic writing, me channeling. So when I get excited about stuff, I want to share it with the kids. So one night, our topic was automatic writing. It's real easy to teach because Spirit does most of the work. So with pen and paper in hand, I said there's only one rule you need to follow, that once you start writing, no matter what, you can't stop. Don't think about it. Don't worry about punctuation. If you're not sure what's right next, then literally write, Kaylaa's crazy, Kaylaa's crazy. I don't know why she's making us do this. This is crazy. Just don't stop moving your pen. So I set the timer for 3 minutes. When they got done, of course, everybody wanted to share. They're so free at not being self-conscious. It's awesome. So a few of the kids just had silly sentences, which is exactly what I said to do if nothing else is coming through. A couple reported that they can't really read it because it doesn't look like their own handwriting, which to me is a sure sign that there is some contact being made. And another sign is when the style of writing gets really formal and they're using words that they don't normally use in their language. So that happened for a couple girls. The final boy, just so reluctant, didn't want to share, 10 years old. He started reading his, and then he just looked kind of embarrassed, and he apologized, and he says, I don't know what it is after this word. Well, in his words, I just had a bunch of silly words, and then it was like I got hit over the head and fell asleep, and when you said stop, I woke up again and I looked down and it was just a bunch of scribbles. So he holds it up to the camera. No joke, it was a half a page of light language codes. He didn't even know what light language was. And when I tried to explain it to him, he still looked really uncomfortable, like he did something wrong. So I love telling that story because it's a real life example of showing what these kids are capable of. And that's without any practice or preparation. So who they are, the structure they have, the crystalline codes they have, give them immediate access to multidimensional beings and galactic families and beings. The crystal children come in with a unique structural difference, which is helpful to understand. When we use the word crystal, we're talking about a human who operates within their 12-strand DNA crystallized. DNA, consider it like a card catalog of information. So we have 2 strands, a carbon and a crystal strand. The unique human structure was designed so that these 2 strands are integrated. So you have your cosmic DNA and your earthly DNA combined. When children come in crystallized, they're not affected by the physical density and experiences. Their DNA is not diminished in any way. So with their carbon and crystal helix intact, they have connection and access to 12 dimensions most of their lifetime, which is really tough for them and confusing when they're trying to adjust to this society while having all this other stuff going on. The crystal kids don't operate in linear time. They're beyond linear time. They maintain this high speed of vibration. So things like channeling and time travel and Akashic access are immediate. They don't need that time to distinguish between dimensions. One of the other things that the average crystal child is in constant communication. Whether they know it or not, they're getting these downloads of information, which is why it's really important for us to teach them and talk about the extrasensory perceptions. To have conversations that allow them to express what's happening inside. To give them ways to manage their energy, to ground it, to integrate it, not to be afraid of it. And in some of these conversations, we can trust that their own knowingness is emerging. And what I mean is many of them already know what they need to do to manage their own energy. We need to just be detectives and look for clues. So they're going to come across unique to the child as well as being age appropriate. So one of the things, some things you might want to look for in younger children is the desire to be outside and in nature all the time. It may be their innate knowing that they need to ground or rejuvenate their energy, or just running and exercising and playing. Another thing you might notice is them like rubbing their arms and saying, I'm all itchy. As empathic children, they pick up, they hold these feelings, they just might have some instinctual knowing that it just doesn't belong there. And as one 6-year-old boy said, it feels like something's sticking to me. That story is going to come a little later. As part of the Conscious Youth Program, we go through this introductory ritual. And it's just this real simple way at the beginning of every meeting to establish a connection with each other. So everybody says their first name, how old they are, where they're from, and they answer what I call my goofy question of the night. It's a simple question, totally unrelated to the topic, that requires a 2 or 3 word answer. Like, what's your favorite movie? Or my most bizarre and creative question to date is, when you take that first bite out of a half a sandwich, do you go for the crust or do you go for the middle? I mean, crazy, right? But I'm a special education teacher, and I never do anything without having a reason. So what they see as fun and silly really has 2 purposes. One is to get a little snippet of information about who they are, and then to give them an opportunity, this group of introverted, shy, often socially awkward kids, a chance that's a non-intimidating way to speak up in front of the group. So at this point, our group number's about 40. Maybe on any given night, 20, right around there, depending on family situations and school schedules now. We've gone international, thus the slide. So we span the globe from Mexico and Canada to the United Kingdom, France, Australia, and most recently, the Philippines. Makes for time zones really crazy. So some kids are having breakfast with us while it's 7 o'clock at night in the East. The kids expect me to participate in this introduction as well. So I tell them where I live, and I tell them how old I am. Now, I kind of get a kick out of seeing the new kids' faces. I don't have to do that, but it's another teaching opportunity. It's really important for them to develop a new perspective on aging. So being 60 or 80 or 95 doesn't have to assume that you're fragile or lacking livelihood. And I'll let you figure out which age I am. But to let go of that belief in societal programming about age and the aging process is something that we can really give them as a gift in their younger life. It all begins with a mindset and a consciousness in their body. How many of us remember reading the Bible stories where the characters are 150 years old or 200 years old and just assume it was an exaggeration? What if it's not? What if these are the kids that is going to be the generation that live out what scientists are now talking about, the longevity of life with the human body. It wasn't until the human collective changed what they thought about the human body running quicker than a 4-minute mile. Once that happened, the floodgates opened. Changing that mindset with this generation just might be magical. As more people are awakening and more children are presenting the need for these new ways of being, we're stepping into this 5th dimensional paradigm of parenting. And it's one that requires us to embrace the idea that we don't own our kids, that we're here to co-create, to teach and learn from each other. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't things they need to learn as they navigate through this 3rd dimensional world, but we need to remember that just because they're crystal multidimensional kids demonstrating wise old soul insights, that they actually came here to learn how to be human. So they're going to pass through the same emotional and psychological stages of development it takes to be human. But they're wise in the ways of knowing themselves, of being aware of their higher self. They may not know it yet, but their own inner compass is getting them to where they intended to be. So we, the adults, kind of have to pull back our desire to protect them from going astray. And our belief, for example, that it's our duty to teach them right and wrong. Well, if we think about it, we'd be passing on our perceptions of right and wrong and the filters and the thought patterns that we were raised with. When they're coming with this higher perspective, their words and their actions and their very vibration being on this planet is inviting us to take a look at the world with a broader and more expansive view, and looking at justice with that same broad view. They see the world with new eyes. So they know that there's justice issues with gender and race, but it's their generation that's already bringing the environment and climate and how we treat different species as matters of justice as well. So the point in that is that it's kind of a false premise to assume it's our responsibility to teach them right from wrong. That we need to trust in their own decision making and even give them a little room to make what we would think are bad choices. And it's in those moments that we can be most helpful. We can bring their attention to their own inner knowingness and ask questions like, what was your heart telling you when you did this? Or how was your higher self communicating to you when you took that action? What were you thinking? What were you thinking? Sorry. That's a parent thing. I'm not a parent. An aunt would never say that. But a parent would say, what were you thinking when you took that action? So it's those times that we can be that spiritual parent for them. And we can give them a vocabulary to be able to express what's going on inside. Use words like head knowing and heart knowing and inner compass. This is also a paradigm shift that requires that we continue to do our own inner work and check in on ourselves. Are we modeling a life of authenticity for these kids? Are we listening to our higher self in the same way we're asking them to listen to their own? Or are we sending mixed messages? So it's in this new paradigm that also requires us to accept the knowledge that our kids are here to live out their own spiritual blueprint. And at the very core, really believe that the universe is here to assist them. They come in with their own karma. It means they're going to struggle in ways that make no sense to us. And despite our best efforts to raise them and love them, it may be their soul's contract to magnetize as much density as possible, transmute it when they're young so they can get on to do their mission in life. Or it may be that their key codes aren't meant to be activated until later in life. So our role is really one of spiritual companion. We can best support them by loving them unconditionally, modeling and exposing them to a life of spirituality, teaching about their inner compass and their inner guidance, and also being the keeper of their hope. If they lose their hope somewhere along the line, we need to keep it safe for them. So it's not easy raising your children in this style, as many of you probably know that. But we need to remember that the good news and the bad news is you volunteered for this assignment. Your soul contract puts you in the role of pioneer. You are among the first to navigate this new space with these new kids. And as daunting as that may sound, it probably also is a joy that melts your heart in a way that no other relationship can. And I had that experience. Back up one second. So after we end up loving them and guiding them, and we provide all these opportunities so they can learn and grow, and we prepare them to spread their wings and fly, the greatest joy really comes in watching them step into their own power and authentic self. And even though I'm not her parent, I had the privilege of watching this happen with Annie. She came to our group when she was 12 years old, starting 7th grade. Highly empathic, highly intelligent, goes to DNA camp for fun. Already has an idea of her mission being somebody that bridges relational conflicting parties and being the harmonizer and the peacemaker. Well, on this particular night, in our conscious youth group, we had a teacher, a guest teacher, who came in and talked about energy bodies and how these kids can ground and strengthen their own. Well, Annie was really interested because she really struggled with school. The environment, being highly empathic, all that negative energy, plus she was really bullied. So that night, she got a little energetic self-care. She was shown that how she could ground and expand the energy from her core star in a way to create a field that would be strong and distinctive enough to shield her from intruding energies, but also flexible enough to allow the joy and the light to come in when she was in safe environments. And this teacher encouraged the children to be playful with this, to practice, not experiment, it was a better word, to go out in crowds and watch how people feel the strength of your energy, and they'll just like part ways. So Annie comes back the next week with this new kind of glow to her and told the kids that this stuff actually works. And then we moved on to other things over the next couple years. I fast forward 2 years, she's now a freshman in high school, and we had the same teacher on 2 years later. And I asked her to kind of give a little testimonial of her last experience. Well, she surprised me in what she said, and her words, I had a lot of anxiety, and I was very overwhelmed by the sensitivities to energy. It got really bad in middle school because I just wasn't like everybody else. So I learned to put an energy around me and practiced it in the hallways. People would either avoid me or walk around my bubble. It was actually fun sometimes because one day I made it so big that this boy actually walked into his locker. And she said, "Yeah, that was me," as she's thinking to herself. So by 8th grade, she says, I was really good at making it bigger and smaller for my friends and bigger for those I wanted to avoid. So I watched her over these 2 years grow into this lovely young woman full of confidence and poise, and is now a leader of our group in what she shares. Unfortunately, I don't see her enough because now she's so involved with high school things that sometimes Wednesday nights are busy, and I try not to take it personally, and it's my own inner work. So if you adopt this new parenting style, the one that aligns more with your child's ability and nurturing of their gifts, what you're going to find, the dominoes are going to begin to fall. And what you're going to find are other areas of their life that just aren't in sync with their highest good. And you can no longer ignore the elephant in the room, which is the educational system. We've known for years that it's not working for our kids. Especially today, and especially our kids. The whole foundation on which it was based just no longer aligns. In 1918, public education, the two main goals of public education was to protect children from child labor or exploitation and provide minimum skills and knowledge to the masses so we can work in the growing industrial society. It sounds like really big, right? It was the first time in 1918 that all 50 states adopted mandatory attendance up through 8th grade. The key focus was conformity and the acquisition of common knowledge. 100 years ago, what's changed today? Attendance is now mandatory from 6 to 16. Behavioral conformity is demanded. And who here has heard of the term Common Core? It's not that nothing's changed in 100 years. We've certainly had structural and policy changes and has kept up with society. In the 1950s, there was desegregation of schools. In the 70s, there were laws and amendments that prohibited discrimination on gender and disability. Now, most people in this room won't remember those things, but trust me, it was different. And in the 1990s, when objections grew louder about the violations of religious rights and parental rights, we saw the emergence of charter schools and magnet schools, as well as a rise in homeschooling. So I'm kind of hard-pressed to come up with any other long-standing institution or business that has relied on 100-year-old ways of doing things. I mean, even Coke and Pepsi, like, adapted to the changing needs and desires of their customers. Certainly our kids have had their needs and desires change over the last 100 years. Human consciousness itself has evolved. So we now know about the principles of human development. We now know about how the brain functions and the best way to learn. We now know that emotional and psychological well-being is fostered when we empower people to make decisions and make their own choices. And we now know, you and I, that the capabilities of these kids are well beyond our understanding. To say that they no longer fit in these pre-existing boxes is like an understatement. So, what's the answer? Or is there an answer? Well, we can wait for government to step in, but oh wait, they did that 20 years ago. In 2001, we had the No Child Left Behind Act, which upon first glance looked hopeful and well-intentioned. It was designed for schools to be more accountable for student success. Now, it kind of led into the controversial school choice program, which is still controversial today. And it also started the era of teaching to the test. In 2010, as if overnight, the vibrational energies of educators and parents across the country just plummeted. That's when the nation implemented Common Core standards. With $400 million of political power and influence of Bill Gates, coupled with $4 billion of federal monies put into Race to the Top, which was used as a subtle coercion to get governors into compliance, 46 states agreed to implement Common Core in exchange for being allowed to compete for that money during a time of recession. Without a pilot program and without any input from educators, national standards were put into place that educators and kids had to comply with. At that time, research institutes were actually funded to come up with high glowing recommendations for those proposed standards. In 2020, there was a study that actually looked back at the 10 years and said that English and math scores actually went down with Common Core. Now, some believe that Bill Gates himself made this tacit admission that it wasn't all that successful when he said that he's no longer going to put his money as an investment in anything that has to do with teacher evaluations as part of its initiative. And he also said that going from a pilot program into wide usage, which is actually, Common Core didn't even have a pilot program, so he was even pushing it a little bit, that should be left up to the experts in the field. But just because of this doesn't mean that he's going away. In 2017, now he's focused on curriculum. He invested $1.7 billion into developing commonly aligned high school curriculum for science, math, and English, which is scheduled for completion in 2022. Now, I could feel the energy in this room. We are not going to go down that dark path. So, on a positive note, we can credit Common Core for being the impetus for thousands of families to leave and run to homeschooling. So as we look around at our global situation and see where society seems to be headed, it's real easy to not get tugged into that darkness. So if we're able to take a step back and look for ways that we can perceive what's happening through a larger lens, and perhaps even ask a few questions, like have the mandatory restrictions that shut down schools and led us to virtual learning actually provided enough of a crisis to push us into reevaluating our educational structures? Has the fear and turmoil of 2020 actually created a new energetic doorway for us to enter? One that will result in educating our students in a new way. One that'll serve the needs of this new generation of highly evolved children. And has all of this been a keystone that's going to usher in a new fifth dimensional paradigm of education? Just as our perspective on parenting determines our decisions in raising children, our perspective on education is going to determine our decision making with fostering their learning. Tens of thousands of families have come to homeschooling and unschooling as a result of the current difficulties, we'll just say. Last May, at one of our Conscious Youth Parent Forums, when schools were just shut down, the topic of conversation was all about education. We had two moms in the group that shared their experience of homeschooling and unschooling and the positive effects that it had on their highly empathic and highly gifted children. No pun intended, but I got schooled that night. They shared with us that when they adopted an unschooling philosophy and approach with their kids, that they saw significant shifts in their behavior and outlooks on life. Frequent emotional outbursts, physical illness, a little boy with suicidal ideations, these things all subsided, and what they started seeing were kids that were more relaxed, healthier, calmer, with a new, rejuvenated, playful spirit. It's not to say that there weren't challenges at home, because any child that's coming in with these higher vibrational frequencies, and they happen to be in a body, is going to have emotional and physical challenges. However, we don't need to amplify those challenges. It's possible to create an environment that nurtures their spiritual gifts, that fosters their learning, and addresses the wide array of needs that they have. And you can do that all at the same time. So these moms were remarkable in two ways. One, in their intuitive knowing that mainstream school just wasn't right for their kids. And also in the courage it took to do it differently. One mom shared with me that for the whole first year, she just felt like she was winging it with her 6-year-old. And trusted that her own innate abilities and the inner compass of her 6-year-old was going to lead them on their way. So as she allowed him to decompress and have his energies get rebalanced, what she said is that she actually saw a greater emergence of new gifts, as well as an intensification of the current gifts. She said that each day, she kind of chuckled when she said this, that each day brought a new adventure and a new learning and a new demand for her to maintain that space of allowance and surrender. And I'm thinking, how can you do anything but surrender when she tells you that one night she walks into the bedroom and sees this open dimensional portal in the ceiling that her little one opened up while he was sleeping. Now, can you imagine one of these kids in a conventional school? I keep trying to picture this as a classroom teacher, and it would just never be boring. So the discussion at this parent forum really affected me for a couple of days, and it challenged what I thought I knew about these kids. And also it created a desire to learn more about all of this. So I started researching homeschooling and unschooling for myself, realized that I have some of the same questions and misconceptions as everybody else. But as I started getting answers to those questions, I recognized that it sparked kind of a new excitement to realize that there really are answers that are viable alternatives to the mainstream education. So I am now a firm believer of homeschooling and unschooling and something called radical unschooling, which really is an equivalent to this fifth dimensional parenting paradigm. And I am kind of like a cheerleader for anybody who is willing to undertake this adventure. I kind of did a deep dive and am now coaching unschooling and homeschooling and get to walk parents through some of their fears and concerns and be that resource emotionally and educationally for them and their children. And doing that really made me wonder if this is going to veer me off my course of working with the kids today. Empowering them, helping them find out who they are. It takes a lot of energy to do that. So will my energies be split? And what I realized, it was just the opposite, that this really is the same path. And I came to understand that by working with the mom of a boy named Logan. I met this woman and her 2 teenage boys at one of our conscious youth events. These 2 boys embody what we're talking about as far as these amazing souls go. And they also demonstrate the challenges that they face simply by being here. So the oldest boy certainly has the vibration of an ascended master, but he's dealing with a physical condition that literally keeps him in bed for days because of the pain. Logan, who I'm referring here as Logan, has been depressed for a number of years and has gotten to that point of really that close to giving up. he was identified to have the soul of a new human. We had a workshop that was channeled past lives, and that was the information that he was given and his mom was given. And a new human is a newcomer to the planet. They come in without the karma and density that grounds them here. They take on that karma and density to allow them to ground here. But they look around and this world is meaningless because they don't belong here. They want to go home, wherever home is. So until they actually come into some recognition of themselves as multidimensional beings or their key codes start activating, they feel really alienated, without meaning. It's a difficult journey. The slogan, emotionally, psychologically, every day for him is effort and survival. So what I hear is his only respite comes in playing video games and secluding himself in his room. Attending school, it just accentuates his despair because of being extremely empathic. Going back to how working with them reinforced the fact that this is the same path. And divine timing was amazing. It always is. So I was talking to Mom on the day after that she and her husband agreed to let Logan drop out of his senior year of high school. She said it was a life and death decision because they literally didn't think he'd survive another year of school. Well, my heart went out to them, and one, just how difficult it's got to be for parents to come to that decision, as well as how hard it's going to be for him to now carry the label dropout on top of already horribly challenging life. And then the universe drops in, and they're in front of me, homeschooling. So we talked about homeschooling as an option for her and her son. And at first she's like, well, he doesn't do work now, he's not going to self-initiate, and who am I to know anything about homeschooling? But I was convinced that this was going to work. So I literally guaranteed her. I said, between you and I, not only won't he have to drop out, he won't have to go back to school in the fall, and we'll get him graduated. One way or another, we'll make this work, get him graduated. So she was going to present this idea to him as an option that afternoon. 8 o'clock that night, my phone pings, and it's a messenger text. I look down, and it's a simple picture of Logan standing in the front yard with his dog. I could barely see through my tears. This was monumental. He hadn't been out of his room for weeks, and he never volunteers to take the dog out. So here's Mom, being the keeper of his hope for all those years, able to give a little bit back to him in saying, you don't need to go back to school, we're not going to put you through that, and him able to receive that. It was like that little bit of light and hope opened up possibilities for him that he apparently wasn't feeling that he had any access to. So I barely wiped the tears from my eyes with the first text when ping goes off again. And here's Mom saying, I'm literally looking at my two sons sitting on the couch together in the living room playing a video game. Well, she couldn't remember the last time the whole family was in the same room at the same time. So the courage it took for her to make that decision, one, to follow her own knowingness, to do something that she didn't feel capable of, to make that decision while she's probably feeling like she's jumping off a cliff somewhere. Perhaps change the whole direction of his life, and perhaps change the lives of everybody on this planet, because he's meant to do great things here. That's what we're here for, each one of us. We are here to give hope and possibility to these kids, to help them stay alive long enough for them to discover who they are and what their purpose is here. They've taken on a really tough, difficult assignment, But at the same time, their soul's contract has given them the resources and the people in this physical lifetime to help them achieve that assignment. So we're called to do big things, and there are no accidents. So never underestimate anything that you do. If you're making a decision based on your own inner knowingness, it's going to be used for the greater good. Somehow this universe is going to assist somebody somehow, we may never know. To bring full closure to their story, school started this year. Logan is in what you would consider deschooling, which is decompressing. All those years of constricted emotion and energies from 11 years of expectations and performance, and it's time for the energies to just rebalance. What looks like not much happening on the outside is huge shifts on the inside. So his days of darkness aren't over, but he's got less anxiety, he's got more hope, and he and his brother have started to work with an energy healer about twice a month. So it's really an amazing story that's going to be awesome to see how it unfolds. So I've been talking about these kids' innate abilities and gifts. It's time to do a little superpower show and tell. So last July, at our 3rd annual weekend in Wizardry, we had an opening night activity where the kids self-identified their gifts. And then we had a big chart paper and we put it up there, and we had a chance to see who these kids are coming in even before they're exposed to any of our workshops. And this is just a short list because that many things can't fit on a slide to give you a few ideas of who these kids were. But we had 12 young wizards, as we call them, representing 6 states across the country, 8 families. They were between 10 and 15 years old, 5 boys, 7 girls. I won't go down this whole list. I'll let you read, or I'll actually read more of them than I wouldn't, just so you could see. Anyway, 10 out of 12 identify themselves as highly empathic. Now that's pretty typical of these kids. However, they also are aware of beings being around them ever since they've been little. Many had invisible friends. They communicate with animals and nature and crystals. Some of these astral travel in their dreams and awake. The healing of themselves and others. We had somebody that was sitting that had a bad knee. And one boy went over to her, just sat on the floor and put his hand, totally unsolicited. So he recognized the energy that was blocked in her knee, sat there, and there was a physical release of pain. Amazing stuff. Of this list, probably the most disconcerting ability for parents and educators, and certainly politicians, is their ability to know when someone's not telling the truth. Can you, now, it's tough. Can you imagine being a parent and being called to your authentic self all the time? Or really being with kids that you know sometimes that it's just not something that you share with a kid, it's adult stuff. So how do you not damage your relationship when this child knows that you're keeping something from them? So it really is a challenge for parents, and it's also a pain for the kids in the way that, picture middle school, that they so want to belong to a group of kids, and what the kids are saying aren't in any way matching what they're feeling inside. So it's really tough. 5 out of 12 recall past lives as well as living on other planets. Imagine the unawakened mother of a little 5-year-old who comes running up with their latest picture that they drew and says, "Look at this, isn't this awesome? This is my other mother." And this unawakened lady goes, what? Even when they're awakened, what? So, but it happens. Shape-shifting. I didn't know until about a year ago that wasn't like strictly done in the mind. I'm like, shape-shift, okay. So these kids actually have experience with shape-shifting. And telepathic abilities, my hypothesis is, after having another teacher in one of our conscious youth sessions, we debriefed after the session. Now, she's extremely telepathic herself with all kinds of major abilities. And on the call, identified 2 of the kids as being telepathic. And she said throughout the call, she would communicate to them telepathically. And what she would notice is they'd kind of like turn their head a little bit, like, what is that? You know, as if they're listening, but not knowing exactly what that was. So if any of your kids start walking around like this, they might be telepathic. But seriously, kind of like empathic kids, they have someone on the outside to say, hey, is that really your feeling or not? Imagine if this is all taking place in your head. How do they discover that these are someone else's voices and thoughts? It's really... So there may be a lot of telepathic kids who just aren't even recognizing that in themselves. A couple years ago, I discovered this book, Anna, Grandmother of Jesus, and it's channeled by a woman named Claire Hartsong. Now, my own awakening experience in my 20s, Ascended Master Jesus revealed himself to me, and ever since then, I've had this awesome connection with human figure Jesus as well as Christ consciousness. So when I saw this book give a metaphysical version of his human journey, I was fascinated. So the Cliff Notes version is that Anna gives an account of her soul's journey over many lifetimes. In order to fulfill her mission, wait for it, she stayed embodied for about 600 years. Did that through knowing about, having knowledge about cell regeneration and going through initiations and various things for her physical body to be rejuvenated. It took years and years for her to prepare herself spiritually and energetically, as well as prepare other souls energetically for actually participating in the linear timeline of Jesus' incarnation here. So she also tells about Mary's journey and the preparations and initiations that she had to go through to carry such a high evolved light being as Jesus. Well, at the time of reading this, what really struck me was reading about how Jesus matured through his childhood and the physical struggles that he had to go through adjusting to his own physical body. It's something I never really considered before. You know, we know that he comes in with little or no veil, and I'm saying this like I really know this, right? But we know that he comes in with little or no veil. He has high vibration of an ascended master, but to really take in the fact that he chose to come in this human suit and had to learn from mentors and teachers how to manage the vibrations and the emotions on this physical plane. Well, Anna tells about when he would have these out of control emotions, that he would go off to a cave somewhere nearby and deal with them, find ways of dealing with them. And his father tasked him with allowing these emotions, transmuting them, and doing all of that without judgment. So many other descriptions of him being highly energetic and empathic, and I got done reading this and realized that if Jesus was alive today, he'd probably be labeled ADHD. Fascinating. I'm not even kidding. You got to read the book. So when I read those pages, I literally felt this shift inside. And what it did for me was give permission to stop fighting so hard to struggle against my own perceived limitations and to stop the belief of, if I was only more spiritual, I wouldn't be struggling. It was probably the first time that I actually embraced my own humanity. I figured that if Jesus himself had the struggle and ways of being human, then who am I to think I can bypass that? So he and other ascended masters in those first years needed teachers and guides to get them through this physical plane. And as I look at our role today as light workers and way showers, that really is part of our personal and collective mission. We can and must be these teachers and mentors for these kids today who are carrying these higher vibrational frequencies just like the other ascended masters did. Speaking of ADHD, many of these kids have the potential for being diagnosed as ADHD, being high vibrational, highly energetic. Before I show you that slide I already showed you, I'd like to say that for the first 10 years of my teaching experience, I worked with kids who learned best when information was presented very simply. So I got really good at making big concepts look very fun and interesting and easy to understand. So all of you are going to be on the receiving end of my simplicity. I'm going to show you my version of how energies pass through our body and then contrast that with somebody that would be demonstrating ADHD behaviors. Higher vibrational, non-physical beings, souls that come in with this earthly assignment, knowing full well that it requires a slowing down of the vibrations in order to enter the physical body. So the tube represents the physical body. As we all know, when we awaken and we start our own healing journey, that it clears out the emotional blockages and it allows for greater input of higher frequencies. And when that happens, we can actually feel the vibrations and the senses, the sensory stimulation in our body. I mean, you have an energy transfer or an activation, energy shifts, planetary. We notice these things. And if you don't notice them at a sensory level, just know that it's still happening at the cellular level. And that little squiggly line there is like the vibrations. Get it? Your physical body? All right. It's happening at that cellular level. Energy is just information. All the cells of our body have their own consciousness. So as we're getting more and more information in, our body needs time to integrate. And that integration process is what we refer to as ascension symptoms. It's our body readjusting. So we may have physical pain or physical discomfort or headaches or emotionally mood swings or anger or sadness or emotional overwhelm and old tapes playing. And even when we understand that at an intellectual level, it's really hard to allow that to happen. So imagine this happening with kids and receiving these kind of frequencies all the time. I'm going to flip back and forth here and talk about what I see as someone with these ADHD tendencies. And there'll be a subtle difference, so I'll let you look. Notice the top of the tube. Oh, teacher makes it fun and interesting. Okay, so before and after. Notice that, well, first of all, there are higher vibrational beings that come in with a more expansive mental body. The top of their funnel is wider. It allows for more information and more frequencies to come in than somebody who is not who we're talking about. And I hate to even say ADHD because it's a label and I hate using labels. So that's what I keep hesitating and avoiding here. But so they come in with a greater amount of input and information, and they have a higher speed of mental processing. So as they're exploding with this information, they're also making connections really fast. These are people who may know what you're going to say before you say it, who see possibilities where other people don't. They're creative and curious, more so than other people. And they crave experience for the sake of experience. So who am I talking about? If you know kids that flit from one project to another, or a child who's 100% committed to learning something one day and 2 weeks later they're no longer interested. Well, it's not really due to a lack of interest or commitment. It's this fast-paced desire for experience. That they have a thought, it ignites a passion, they pursue it, they satisfy the desire, and then they're on to the next curiosity. Or what about the child that you consider the interrupter? Next time they do that, take note of the nature of the interruption. Are they simply 5 steps ahead of the conversation? Is what seems totally unrelated to the topic really them seeing the direction of the conversation, making the connections they need to make, and they're done with the conversation and they're already on to something else? So these are just a couple of examples of an expanded mental body. It's quite challenging for parents, I'm sure. However, there's more challenges to come. When all of that extra mental energy has to go somewhere, and it goes into the physical structure, it goes into that little tube. Many with an expanded mental body don't have the corresponding expansion in their physical or emotional body. So when that funnels down, you'll have the physical body trying to integrate all these extra frequencies. Where does all that extra physical energy go? It comes out in hyperactivity, or an inability to sit still, or constant chatter, or fidgeting. And emotionally, it can be overwhelming as well. And these kids aren't going to understand what's happening. And very few probably have tools to manage that or release that. So as their body is feeling out of control inside, that's when we become witness to outbursts with no apparent trigger, or mood swings, or fighting with their sibling, or acts of defiance. And what tends to be our responses as parents or adults or educators? We ask that notorious question, why? Why can't you sit still? Why are you playing with the food on your plate? Why did you hit your brother or sister? Why can't you just behave? And we get the answer that baffles us the most, which is, I don't know. Now, if you look at the conditions that we just described, chances are that I don't know is an honest answer. I mean, how could they possibly understand or be self-reflective enough to know that this is energetic? My slides are interesting and fun. This information is fascinating, hopefully, but what do you do with it? So I believe in the old adage of knowledge is power, and self-knowledge makes us powerful. So why not give this information to our kids at a young age? Kids diagnosed with ADHD are constantly getting messages that they're different from everybody else. They're told that their brains function differently. If you're that child, at one point or another, you're going to be internalizing these messages and start thinking, because you're being told pretty much, that you're flawed. So you're someone that now requires accommodations. Or in school, you're certain to be put on an IEP because you have behavioral and learning differences. And in society today, these differences are considered a disability. You may even be taken to a doctor and put on medication because you don't act like everybody else. And that's unacceptable. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't offer assistance to these kids. Can accommodations be helpful? Absolutely. Can teachers, is it helpful for them to know that your kid needs movements, or shouldn't have that many worksheets if they want really to learn better? Absolutely. Can medications be helpful? Possibly. But can we ever really let go of those messages, the ones that have them believing that there's something wrong with them? That's not so easy. And if anything, it takes people that they trust who can influence them and tell them that that's just not true. So imagine how their self-perception can shift if we gave them this metaphysical version of ADHD. Or imagine how we can help them move from feeling like they're a victim of circumstance to reclaiming some of their power. Imagine us doing this. We pull our ADHD kiddo aside and we have a conversation. And we say, you know what they're saying is true. Your brain does work differently. It's actually faster and is more creative. And that's so amazing. And you even know what I'm going to say before I say it. And then we tell them that, one day all people's brains are going to work as fast as yours does. But until that time comes, you need to be patient and compassionate while the rest of us catch up. We can't make our own brains speed up, so sometimes it's going to be up to you to slow yours down, especially when you're talking to a teacher or a stranger that doesn't know you like I do. Now that doesn't sound flawed. That sounds like a superpower. So giving them this information is an incredible gift. Helping them get a sense that they have control over their own life. That's what this can do. If we can find appropriate ways to give them those words to express, like I said, what's going on inside, give them techniques for moving this energy, all this blocked energy, help it move through their system, and give them ways of expression for that emotional overwhelm. And all of this brings me to the most challenging and perhaps most inspired private session I've had with a kid. Dante. His mom wanted to see if he could get in one of our youth programs. Well, he was too young, so she asked that we meet one-on-one. Dante is highly energetic, very empathic, is totally affected even in small groups of people, and it results in some very manic behavior. So his mom was interested in some ways that we can ground his energy, and also some protection, because he's also a magnet for all kinds of deceased spirits. So I was pretty concerned doing a remote session with somebody that energetic and that young. Now, my approach with working with younger kids is to find common ground as quickly as possible. One, to break the ice, and also to grab their attention. So I get my cat on screen really fast, and I find out from the parents what their favorite movies are. And I use their favorite superhero as a launching point to talk about their own supernatural abilities. So Dante loved Spider-Man. So it was really simple to talk about spidey senses and talk about the beings that he sees and he hears. Getting him to stop jumping from furniture to furniture to furniture because he wanted to show me how Spider-Man gets around the city was not so easy. We had about 4-minute intervals of screen time. Mom worked tirelessly to get him to come back. Well, it was at the 22-minute mark of a 60-minute session that I realized that my teacher toolbox for any kind of engagement was already empty. So I never knew how magical my cosmic support team was until I cried out, tell me where to go next. And divine inspiration. Sticky notes. So I got Dante back at the screen. And my conversation went something like this. Dante, is it true your mother tells me you're like Magneto Man? That when you walk into a room, people's feelings just jump off of them and they get stuck right onto you. He's not jumping on furniture anymore, and out come my sticky notes. So I say, is this what it's like? That all these feelings kind of come at you, and you've got mad, and you've got sad, and you've got angry, and you've got, where's my microphone, worried, and this, and this. Well, he's looking at me like, I don't care about Spider-Man. There's a crazy lady on my screen with all these sticky notes on her, because literally I had all these sticky notes on me. So I said, is this kind of what it feels like? What does it feel like when all these little feelings are stuck to you? And he says, I get really jittery and jumpy and squirmy. So I said, awesome, I got this great game to get rid of sticky feelings. So step one was I had him jump around and flail his arms, and I'm not going to do that here. But he got into it. Step two was to start rubbing all of these sticky notes off and tell these feelings, go away, you don't belong on me. Step three was to get really still and pretend like you're standing outside in pouring down rain and let the water wash over any of those feelings that happen to be left. And you'll know you're done when it feels like you're standing in this big mud puddle and you can feel it squishing between your toes. A couple days later, I get some feedback from the mom. She said the first thing Dante made her do is go out and buy his own set of sticky notes. And he was practicing every time he got hyper. And she thanked me. She says, he's a little bit calmer. As a result, I'm a little bit calmer. And I said, thank you to my cosmic team. It was fun. It's unfortunate that if you have this energetic child, if they're going to conventional school, somewhere along the line, some teacher is going to find it necessary, let's say, to send something home and says, we'd like you to assess your child for ADHD. That might be accompanied with a referral to a medical doctor. And then you're faced with the question of whether to medicate or not. And it's difficult enough for us as adults to make that decision for ourselves. And we have to make that decision for our child. It can be pretty overwhelming. So first of all, I want to say the disclaimer, I am not a doctor. This is not medical advice. I have some experience, my own as well as working with other folks. And we talked a little bit about ADHD. I'm going to talk a little bit about depression. I gave a presentation last year that I shared my own journey through teenage years and young adulthood. So as an insider, what I'd like to say, first of all, so we've got this debate to medicate or not, and I kind of want to give you both ends of this and then some information that came through another channel, not myself. It wasn't my automatic writing. So being an insider, I can tell you that being in the depths of despair and depression is truly a suffering that doesn't have words. It's like it permeates like this physical heaviness and unrelenting brain fog that prevents any kind of joy from happening. And it blocks you from seeing hope or the possibility of hope. Now, physical imbalances, brain chemistry imbalances are real. If you have a prolonged depression, it does affect your brain chemistry. So it's the question to consider. If there is a medication that can raise you from that despair to a level that I call curious possibility, which is you have at least enough energy physically and emotionally to be open to the possibility that there's hope. Do you consider a medication on a temporary basis that gives you or your child a fighting chance to get out of that hole? It's a tough decision. If you do, I highly recommend coupling that decision with ongoing energy work, specifically for removing blockages. And certainly these blockages are going to exist when you've got the depressed state. If you decide not to medicate, my next story demonstrates some of the amazing things that can happen as a result. Mom reached out to me on a quest to find a non-medical solution to Andrea's depression, suicidal ideations, highly empathic. Her family was really, really pressuring her to put her on medication, and she just felt there's got to be another solution. So she explored all kinds of alternatives. Before she saw me, she even had her daughter have a channeling session with someone, and it actually got some really good insights and a few tools to use. And she shared that information with me prior to our session. They said that Andrea was an extreme empath, a starseed, that she was here to be a healer and a guide, and at a very high rate of vibration and frequency that is meant to raise humanity's consciousness. She also had a wide open higher heart chakra. And as a result, a lot of the pain and despair and sadness she was feeling was really that of the collective, of humanity and of the planet. So she was given a few tools to not only reach out to her higher self, but to step into her higher self and turn over some of the burden of that responsibility, if even momentarily. Now, they acknowledge that her soul did agree to come in with this big mission, but it was never meant to create the kind of heaviness that it did where it diminished her own spirit. So they assured her that she was just as a teenager in the process of growing into her own ability to maneuver energy and manage these energies. So seek out experiences of joy. Be a teenager. Allow this to pass through you, and your mission and time is coming. So I only met with her once. I was able to connect Mom with a few local people who then put her in touch with a healer. What happened after that was like magical. The divine timing, the universe, the witness to key codes being activated. 3 months after this, I get this beautiful long email from Mom, and I have just a couple of things to highlight and share, and it came down to, I'm in awe of the changes in Andrea. I can't explain it, whether it was the opening of a portal, this was last fall, I believe, an energetic portal, or connection with this healer, but the changes she's seeing is just breathtaking. Andrea realized she's an empath. She's finding ways to control her feelings, separating hers from others. She's been wearing an amethyst around her neck to assist with the heart chakra, and is talking wise things, and is literally, the word she used is giddy with happiness. Here's this child who was suicidal 3 months earlier. And that story, to me, one, we keep going back to the importance of parents staying true and honoring their own intuition. But also, if and when depression happens in some of our kids, just know that it's multifaceted in origin. There is no one thing. We've got personal trauma, we've got collective trauma, there's many layers. And as I said earlier, some of these kids have contracts to where they're here to magnetize as much density as possible in order to transmute it to go on and do greater things. Well, medication might actually interrupt that contract. Anything we take into our bodies, but medication can dull the very spiritual connections that might guide these kids to transmute the depression or some other physical illness. So considering that resisting our own path in itself can manifest in ways that might be even worse than the depression in order to get our attention, to get us back on track. Any of us, and talking about us now and not necessarily the kids, but when we're posed with any kind of medication, physical illness or not, it's really hard not to resist taking that or judge ourselves for taking that. We may fear that this connection, this dulled sense, is going to keep us from moving forward on our spiritual path. I had a channeled session a couple years ago about this very topic. And what is the role of medication and the spiritual path? And in summary, the guide said that the third dimensional resonance of medication actually does serve in a third dimensional construct. And the third dimensional body is subject to imbalances based on stress and disease and everything else. And the medication can serve to regain that balance. However, in a high vibrational state, that imbalance doesn't exist. What I found fascinating with this message was these guides pointed out how important it is for the spiritual progression that we release the judgment of ourselves in regards to taking the medication, to allow the natural healing and the shifting to take place, and to accept the fact that the medication is serving that shift. They also said that struggling or efforting to get off, we try to get off and then we realize we have to get back on again, and that whole cycle is, you won't need to effort because that need will just one day no longer be there as we continue on our journey. So in talking about all of this, I guess the message is it comes down to an individual discernment, always. Following your own intuition, trusting that the universe has your highest intention, and then letting go of the outcome. If you need to reevaluate in 3 or 6 months about taking a medication, do that, but don't hang on to that little nagging voice, I should, I shouldn't. Awakened and conscious kids truly are bringing in a new perspective. These little emissaries of pure love are our new ascended masters, and they're raising our consciousness of ourselves and of the planet, and at the same time they're working with us in co-creation for this new earth and these new ascension timelines. I kind of want to bookend this with Cheyenne's second transmission, and this is from Kuan Yin. And it says, these young ones bring healing to a world full of hurt. They bring love where there is hate. They bring hope where there is despair. They are placed where they are needed. But these young ones are sponges, and they soak in all frequencies, loving or fear-based. Many of them remember a time of love, but this is nashed by the mindset. Together, as a new collective, these children bring and hold the higher frequencies on this planet. love and nurture them, for they are your future. I'd like to end our time together with my favorite weird aunt story. And it's one that I've grounded my work with kids on the message that I learned. We go back to my nephew being about 6 years old, and I was asked to assist in helping him learn to ride his two-wheel bike without training wheel. It was the perfect neighborhood to do so. It had that little incline there that gives him just enough momentum. So I was at the top of the hill with my nephew, and my brother was about 3 houses away, ready to catch him as he came on by. It was a perfect aunt's memory in the making, you know? So I give him that initial push off, and he's pedaling and he's pedaling and he's maintaining his balance. And I knew he would because he's totally coordinated and athletic. Halfway down the hill, I hear my brother yell, "Coast, Adam, coast." And I'm watching Adam, and he's still pedaling and he's picking up speed. And he passes my brother, and the only way he's going to stop. The bike goes flying, he goes flying, they both end up in the grass. So he comes back up to me. We push off again. Once again, he's pedaling and pedaling at the halfway mark. "Coast, Adam, coast." Once again, he's pedaling and pedaling, and he passes my brother up and comes to another crashing stop. My brother, in the meantime, is baffled. And he's trying not to sound frustrated. And he goes, "Adam, didn't you hear me say coast?" And I could just feel it from 3 houses away, you know. So Adam comes back to me, and I'm thinking third time's a charm. We push off. He pedals. Coast. Pedals. Crashes again. And I am like, seriously, dude, what is going on? Well, my brother has lost all patience. He starts yelling at Adam for not following his directions. In the meantime, Adam's over there in the grass, literally kicking his bike for not cooperating. Neither one of them were having fun anymore. So he comes back up the hill, totally ready to give up. And then I had the aha moment of the century. And I turned to him and I asked so gently, "Adam, do you know what the word coast means?" And he said, "No." And I said, "It just means to stop pedaling. So when your dad says coast, just stop pedaling. Don't put the brake on, just stop moving your feet." Once again, we push off. He pedals. "Coast, Adam, coast." And this time, boom, drop the mic. He stops pedaling. He slows down. He puts on the brake, and he hops right off. And this weird aunt is at the top of the hill doing her happy dance. He was so proud of himself. And the lesson I learned that day was that if a child's not following your direction, it might be as simple as he doesn't understand the words you're using. And the younger they are, the more true this is going to be. The spiritual lesson for all of us. When you find yourself pedaling and trying as hard as you can to make something happen, sometimes all you really need to do is coast.
Well, firstly, I just wanted to say thank you. And I feel that the work that you're doing is some of the most important work on the planet. So it's a big energy to be funneling up there. So, maybe that's some of what's going on. But it's no small thing, what you're doing. I myself have done work with kids. I used to have a class called Intuitive Kids. And I have 2 kids. And it's different working with other kids than your own kids. So I may want to talk to you about, especially my oldest and your program. It's just such a humbling experience, in my experience, to parent these children who come in. Their path is already. All of our paths are already in front of us, but they just are like, they're so clear on it. And I really feel like it's our job as parents to just support them in that and give them a sense of boundary and hold containment in that. And, you know, it's like a learning experience, constantly shifting and changing the way that I might be talking to them or explaining something or listening, how I might be listening or not listening. And, you know, really tapping into, okay, how can, you know, maybe I assist them in working through this on an energy level. They both have like a, you know, huge toolbox of energy tools that they can use or not use. Sometimes I think they don't want to use them just because mom said that it was, you know, mom suggested it, especially the teenager at this point.
Yeah, that's why actually coming to my group is mom said the same thing 2 weeks ago, but Kaylaa, thank you for saying it again because they weren't listening to me.
Yeah. I'm definitely reaching that point with my eldest. So, it's also, it's interesting when they are also very strong-willed. So like my youngest my kids are totally different. The oldest is like magnet for everything, so empathic, like everyone's thoughts, everyone's feelings, you know, and my youngest is like, this is who I am. You know,
That's awesome.
And so they need totally different things as far as energy tools go, but you know, it's a blessing to witness and hold space for them, and I just really appreciate you for what you're doing. I was really excited to hear you talk, and I like the little parts where whatever, I don't even know what you didn't feel was working right for you, but I think it's just kind of embracing the playfulness of all of, you know, I mean.
Normally there's some cheat sheets up here in presenter mode, so I can kind of see what's coming next. Well, thank you. I survived. Thank you all.
Yeah, the fairies are messing with you maybe. It's getting you in that playful mode. Keep the energy light.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. You're amazing.
Yeah.
First of all, I'd like to say, where were you 15 years ago when I was a kid? Because things would be different. This was a wonderful presentation. I loved watching it. It shifted my own energy. Just listening to you speak, it reflects what you give the kids, is that just, it feels you're so receptive to people. There's just this, it's like this authentic love, and I think that's the number one thing that the kids receive from you. It allows them to just feel like they don't need to live up to a certain expectation in that moment. Having been in your program, I can say, especially, I mean, I was, you know, much older than the other kids, but that gave me the perspective to see just how much it impacted them. And, you know, this is just such important work. I mean, it's true that, you know, if all of us had these tools, if our parents had these tools, if your parents had these tools, things would be different in this planet, you know? Yeah. And I think I want to draw attention to, for parents, that the process of raising a kid, there's that burden of expectation on yourself to do well enough or to do it right. And you have to have the same compassion for yourself that you're having with your kid who's learning, because you can only be as good as where you're at. And it's a learning process, parenting, as much as it is growing up as a child. So I can say, growing up, after, you know, as a kid, you don't really understand what it's like to be a parent, but, you know, now going into adulthood, there comes a point where you're able to empathize in a different way, where you can step into your parents' shoes and see, you know, there's no blame for where you were at when we were your kid, you know, like there is the equal compassion. It's mirrored. We don't expect you to do better than you could do, the same way you don't expect us to do better than we can do as a kid. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah. How'd you get to be so wise? Wow.
Her.
And Mom, I'm so glad you're here to hear that.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to thank you. And I was a part of the group. It was new. And you did your first class with parents. And I was so ashamed. I didn't even have the video on because it was just really, I wouldn't have my picture on the Zoom. It was Zoom. It's hard, and I'm glad you're here for them. And you are amazing. And I did the best I could, and I appreciate that you saw that because it didn't feel like that when I was doing it. But so thank you.
You seriously.
We invite Grant everywhere we go. We just can't get enough.
Well, I'm grateful. I'm so grateful for you. I'm grateful that you found people that can help you. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Love fest over there. Good.
I have a question. I'm not sure. And you may not have an answer for this, and it may be something that we need to address in the future. But I'm just wondering about the older kids, the 18 to 21-year-olds, and these labels of ADD and ADHD. And it seems like, and it may just be me, but it seems like there's kind of a concerted effort to make that like something to fight for. Like I'm ADD and I take medication and this is who I am, and you shouldn't judge me for that by saying I have gifts or I'm special or I am, you know what I'm saying? Like maybe it's something in the consciousness that I'm picking up on. So my question to you is, have you ever had a parent who recognized their child as so incredibly gifted, but they see themselves as sick? And how do you, is that something you can work with a parent or a parent and child together on, or is it just not their time? Is it just their path to go whatever road they're currently on?
So the parent is feeling
have you ever had
like
a
the
parent
child
yeah.
is
Have you
sick,
ever,
or the parent
no,
is
no.
feeling less than?
No, have you ever had a parent come in and say, my kid is gifted, but they think they have ADD and they need to be on medication, and I want to take them off because I see that that's not the case. Like they totally gifted, and the child is the one that is putting up the roadblock in how in I'm not meaning to put you on the spot. I'm just curious if you've had that situation, and what are your thoughts on that? Like where do you go with a situation like that where you have a teenage child who's saying, I'm not gifted, I'm sick, but a parent's looking at him going, you're obviously totally empathic.
Wow. I would think, now I've never had that situation. And there's a perfect example of internalizing all those messages, and is the only way to not hear those be around other kids who are gifted, because just like we're saying, you're not going to listen to mom or dad, or so just out of the parental rebellion, they're going to push back on that. So, I don't know, but I would.
This is, I actually have this question come up so much. It's crazy. Like, that's when I have readings, I'll have parents come and say, well, I have a kid and I see this in them, but they're really, pushing the other direction.
Yeah. Well,
and
what I can tell you is this. When I was in the classroom, especially teaching high school kids, we knew within 20 seconds of walking through the door if a kid was medicated. I worked with kids with emotional and behavioral disabilities. 85% of the kids was on some kind of medication. From a teacher perspective, it is true when you say, without medication, these kids don't have a shot at learning, because literally, they're unable to control what's going on inside of them. Now, one girl, actually, we had this conversation, and she was self-reflective enough. She was this kid that literally, she couldn't come into the classroom. It took about 20 minutes to get down the hall into the classroom because she's running around, flitting around, visiting other classrooms. Behavioral conformity, she didn't pass. And then couldn't sit still, and literally, there was nothing there to engage with. she talked and said she didn't like being on medication because she wasn't herself and she couldn't be fun anymore. But at the same time, her other self, she acknowledges, feels out of control. So in answer to you, I'm guessing that maybe this is a child that knows what it's like to be out of control, and the medication is the only thing that helps. So in that sense, it's more of a self-preserving decision, and it has nothing to do with spirituality, nor can it when they're at school being the odd person out because they're so out of control.
That was brilliant because, you know, when you take that a step further, it's the environment that they're attempting to adjust to as opposed to their own behavioral, right, or emotional instability.
Yeah,
Right. Which the medication helps. Yeah.
it can, yeah. Thank you, everybody, for entertaining me.